town, and in just a minute, we'll see what she looks like. and there she is. And so I have known Carrie for a few years, just through our entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Alaska. And through various events, we have now found ourselves in the same space. So me through Health Tie, and now Carrie has been doing promotion for how to hold safe events during the time of COVID. So of course, Toast of the Town was well known in Alaska for holding events. If you ever went to anything entrepreneurial, Carrie was usually behind the scenes in some way. And now she has transitioned, and she's been asked to help other organizations figure out how to have events safely in Alaska. So I'm going to give a big Health Tie welcome to Carrie Shepard. And Carrie, hand it over to you. It's all yours.
Thank you. It's very nice to meet you. And I just am so grateful that Jacqueline invited me to be here today. Before we get started, I thought I would share a little snippet of a fun sizzle reel video that shares a little bit about how our company pivoted during COVID. So I'm going to share my screen here. And hold on a second. Just realized, can you guys hear that?
We can't hear it, Carrie, but we can see it.
Just a moment. Okay. I think what I might do is, I just realized that I'm going to share the video link and I'll share it after the presentation rather than try to troubleshoot the audio right now. But I think that is so indicative of how events have run since COVID, is all of us have had to become Zoom experts. and sometimes the tech doesn't work exactly as you practiced. Well, as Jacqueline said, I am the co-founder of Toast of the Town, and we are an event planning and experiential marketing company based in Anchorage. We have a team that is now spread around the West Coast and Hawaii, and we service clients around the state of Alaska and in the Pacific Northwest. And for the last 4 years, we've also served as the preferred vendor for event services for the state of Alaska. And it's in that role as the vendor for the state of Alaska that really pushed us to innovate quickly and pivot events online in February, actually, before any quarantine orders had actually been issued. I'm coming to you today from, I was saying earlier, rainy Seattle. I have a lot of family here and I'm working here remotely for the month. But in February, I was in Seattle and could see that things were beginning to get shut down, and that we had 3 different state trainings that were essential for practitioners for everything from medicated assisted treatment to some other things that had CEUs attached that had to happen. And so in late February, we completely turned on a dime, found a vendor, a virtual event production partner who specialized in online event production and videography, and recruited an entire new team and trained them in 2 weeks. And so it's been a wild ride. But with that, what I wanted to share is I'd like to spend the first few minutes just sharing a little bit about what we did to address the current needs to still communicate and gather together, as well as some of the concerns that we're still dealing with and finding solutions to. And once I share a little bit about kind of where we are today, I'd love to open it up to a larger discussion with all of you who are here with me virtually and on the call to just discuss concerns that you have, but also ideas. One of the things I love about Health Tie is that we get to come together to see our overlapping interests and efforts, and also just share, you know, what we're working with and struggling with, because maybe you have some solutions that we haven't even thought of yet. So this is also meant to be interactive, so I'm also going to ask your participation in some polls and just to share your ideas. So how does that sound? Sound good? Okay, great. So, dun, dun, dun. Welcome to the Upside Down. As it says here, this is season we never wanted. And this is our core team. I'm a business partner, Crystal Swartzlander, here in the front, and Martha Keller, managing director. And this is the head of our virtual production partners, Upper One Studios, who pivoted with us in late February to come up with a new approach to events. Our industry is especially hard hit. An industry report that came out in the beginning of September said that 90% of event planners either planned to close for the season, or were facing bankruptcy, or had to lay off most of their staff. I mean, all of those scenarios are terrible. And part of the reason is that, you know, some of it's just depending on their speciality. You know, some only did massive events for like the Grammys or Emmys, and those just aren't happening in the same way. But others really had not considered or begun to investigate the technologies that have been available for about a decade to host events online, and are just trying to work it out. So it's been a really difficult time for the industry in general. But in addition, you know, we're event planners because we see an increasing value in gathering together. Our favorite thing is to bring people together in person. And so the transition for us as extroverts who like to see people face to face has been, I would say, emotionally challenging. We still have fun online, but it's certainly not the same as getting to hug your friends or shake somebody's hand or have those roundtable discussions where you really meet eye to eye and can talk out your ideas in a way where you don't have to worry about interrupting somebody when they're talking online, or somebody getting distracted by multitasking and typing during your presentation. So I think that's one of the challenges of that we're facing. Okay, so I just want to share a little bit of our past year's calendar, and you can see a bit of our journey of how we evolved. So the most important thing we did, of course, was establish a model to pivot events online. We take a project management approach to event planning. So retooling this, actually, like I said, we were able to do in 2 weeks, and I'm really proud of that. And we've just continued to refine our processes. For example, our very first event we did took 6 rehearsals. I mean, we just really were trying to figure out how to get people to learn how to unmute properly, share their slides, hold their camera properly, you know, those things. And we did that. The second was, as the country began to reopen, we realized we really need a framework for hybrid events. And one of the biggest challenges that Jacqueline and I were talking about last week is that there's no black and white. There's no how-to guide that says this is the way to do events. It's so gray, especially when, you know, different cities have different rules. For example, Anchorage has been, you know, mostly, I would say, only partially open for the past 6 months, but the Valley is almost entirely open. So what was happening is event promoters and even brides who wanted to have their wedding were not canceling, but rather moving their event to the Valley. And because of that, there was definitely concern at the city level, at the state level, and then just, you know, concerned citizens that there was no oversight or regulation. And also people just didn't feel confident that the people hosting these events had done their due diligence to protect the attendees. We are a part of the Wedding Planners Organization of Alaska, and it's been interesting because people have been very cautious to not step on each other's toes, but I will say there were some really serious discussions in May when several event planners decided to move forward and host events with 300 wedding guests who are flying in from around the country and even other countries. And I saw some eyes go, whoa. And how do you address your colleagues in your industry? You know, how do you tell a bride, like, maybe this isn't a great idea. We know you want your Aunt Patty to come from Iowa, but maybe she could watch on Zoom. You know, these are really difficult things that people have been trying to navigate, while also, again, like I said, not trying to step on people's toes. So that's kind of where we've been working at, is figuring out how do you have a hybrid event with a limited attendance, and that has an overlay of a virtual event that feels like you're there. And so we feel like we have been refining that as well. And now it's just a matter of getting people on board to that model. But we think this is actually the future of events, hybrid events. Okay, in May, we realized, oh gosh, things are going all live. Concerts were happening. There's a very infamous one at the Alaska Raceway, which I have a picture of later, where they were expecting a small turnout and almost 3,000 people showed up and rushed the stage after a few beers. Now, I might be characterizing that a little bit poorly, but you can imagine how health officials were thinking, oh my goodness, you know, how do we help mitigate the risk at this kind of event? And how do we help event promoters, you know, keep people safe? So this is something we've been working on, and right now there's actually an RFP that's out for the state that we are bidding on to assist the state of Alaska in actually going on site and working with event planners and even people like school sports directors to mitigate risk as much as possible. And then last but not least, this is where we are right now. The neatest thing about being a part of the startup community is tapping into other technologies. And we developed in August. It hasn't been rolled out yet. So when I say developed, it's in that early stage, but it's mapped out, it's tested. We have a first iteration, it works. But to actually develop a real-time event risk notification. And I had actually reached out to Jacqueline about this because I thought, oh my gosh, you know, we have a sister company that is a data marketing company, and we have some really talented data analysts and programmers on that team. And what we figured out is we can actually track every event. And let's say that my hometown's Valdez. Let's say that there's an event planner in Valdez who's going to host an outdoor concert and mountain biking race, right? And so we can track that. In addition, what we can do is connect it to the health alerts for that city, as well as health alerts from cities where registrants live. And if there's a change in the health alert, we can actually, through automatic email notification, let every stakeholder know, hey there, Valdez organizer, your health alert has not changed, but you have 50% of your registrants coming from Palmer, and there's a major health alert. This is just a courtesy notification to let you know, maybe you want to change your testing requirements before people show up. Or it could be that Valdez's status does change. And this now lets the city know, like, one, that there was an event planned, which we've heard from several mayors, that's been a surprise to them. And secondly, that the organizer could be notified that the health alert has changed, and then provide you know, recommendations from the state, the CDC, on how to mitigate the risk, you know, of that specific health alert. So this is something that we got pretty excited about because it's a lot of labor to be the person, you know, to be the, oh my goodness. Oh, of course I would like want to call him Johnny Appleseed, and that is not his name. You know, the guy who like rode through the town telling them the British were coming.
Paul Revere.
Thank you, Paul Revere. I was like, Johnny Appleseed, come on. I'm in Washington. It's all about the apples right now. Thank you, Paul Revere. So to be the Paul Revere, that takes a lot of labor. And so we think, gosh, let's use what we can. Additionally, this really could be turned into an app. So anyway, so this is what we're developing right now. Okay, so you can tell my enthusiasm is there. Just really briefly, I just wanted to show you a couple resources in case you're curious about what do successful events look like. This is our most successful fundraiser to date. We pivoted the Pacific Northern Academy, which is a private school in Anchorage, and their annual fundraiser, which provides a large portion of their operating budget online, and they actually exceeded their fundraising goal by 25%, and we reduced their cost by almost 200%. So this is a great example, and you can actually go and tool around and look in the videos at our website, toasttovirtual.com/nonprofit. So that's really fun. Additionally, we did create, this says Meet the Platform. Our platform is not software as a service, but what it is it's a proven collection of softwares and applications that are video first. So we do a lot of video recording to create the interaction rather than relying all on Zoom, which has a lot of user error and opportunity for mistiming. But we also have created this, and you can also see this featured on that toasttovirtual.com. And last but not least, what I wanted to share with you before we jump to the polling is what kinds of events are going on in Alaska that are on my radar, and then I'd love to hear more about which ones are on your radar. So currently, these are the ones that have continued to move forward, actually starting in May, with very little pause. Student sporting events, I was a little bit, now you have to realize, obviously you can tell by my language, I'm a little bit cautious about people meeting and not following the basic guidelines of social distancing, masks, and sanitation. But I was surprised to see a lot of friends attending football games around the state who are not masked up, not socially distancing, in the stands, the concession stands were not following guidelines. These are still happening. Community hearings, obviously, if you've been following the news, these are still happening, and people are trying to figure out how to have representation and not keep people out of the chambers while still honoring social distancing. Weddings, I already mentioned, those are still happening, small and large. And last but not least, something that you'll see on the horizon, especially if you're active on Facebook, there are a lot of indoor-outdoor markets that are happening, especially at our state fairground, where they feel like they can pretty safely keep social distancing, especially with security and staffing. And then there are a lot more concerts that I've seen announced. So these are the current live events in Alaska that we are working to help share some guidelines and new formats for holding events. And these are some of the challenges that come with them. So the first is, actually I haven't really talked about this, but one of the biggest challenges as we moved from just meeting in person to online is that those in rural Alaska actually only had satellite internet. The Zoom conferencing really is not a good option for them. So one of the things that we're excited about is there are some technologies, including embedded video. If any of you subscribe to Netflix and watched the latest season of why am I forgetting it? But Kimmy Schmidt, Unbreakable, Kimmy Schmidt, thank you. It's like it was coming. Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, that is a choose your own adventure TV show. Similarly, we actually have this technology. It's not even that expensive. It just takes the time to line out the choices. Like, okay, you're here. Are you here for your continuing education certification for MAT or for peer support counseling? And then in the video, it would take you into that path. So that's the type of thing that we're imagining. We could send that video out to rural Alaska and they could get a similar training that could be based on recordings from an online training. Does that make sense? Okay. The second is creating buy-in from live event organizers for risk mitigation standards. With the latest slate of event announcements, I think this is kind of top of mind for our team, and just building a consensus on what risk mitigation really looks like. And then last but not least, finding meaningful ways to connect online to replace live events. I just have one quick story, and that is that we met recently with the Department of Transportation and found that because, you know, all travel ceased, their budget was so, for travel was so large to send people to trainings and conferences, they were actually able to renovate their offices and pay for some online training that people sorely needed. But more than that, around the same time as that conversation, we were hosting the 2020 MAT conference for the Department of Health and Social Services. And we've hosted this conference or produced this conference for them for 4 years. Typically they have 100 people come. We manage all of the scholarships and travel, et cetera. And that comprised approximately 25% of their budget in past years. This year we were able to reduce the cost of the event by about 10%. And they had nearly 300 attendees getting that training. That's huge. So we're really seeing the efficacy of just completely replacing them. Okay. So before we move over to polling, I just wanted to share, this is the kind of slide they tell you not to share that has a lot of text, but but I will say this is some of the deep dive that Jacqueline mentioned in the newsletter that we've been looking at. And these are some of the concerns that we are researching. So it's everything from, you know, testing for staff and attendees, preventing and controlling infection when you're meeting with people, protection of food, and even event medical services. So these are just some of the issues that we're continuing to find solutions to. And these may actually be some of the things that you're concerned about as well. Okay, so now finally, let's see here. What I'd like to do is actually transition away from my presentation and go to some polls to get your feedback and ideas before the end of our call. So if you could please do me the favor of opening up a new web browser and going to pollev.com/Carrie S000. I'll have you join me on Polls Everywhere. And if you're on the phone, let me actually read that for you. You can actually text Carrie, CARRIE, S as in shepherd, 000, and text that word Carrie S000 to 22333, and you'll be able to actually join the poll as well. Okay, so the first question, once you get over to pollev.com, that I'm asking that you please answer.
Hey, Carrie, will you put the website address back on? I didn't get it entered fast enough and it's not on the screen anymore.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Hold on a second. There we go. Great. I'm actually going to do a share of our actual poll here. Okay. So now on your Zoom screen, you should also be able to see the poll EV. So the first question is, what type of event do you feel must be held in person? Okay, I see community, mixers, cocktails, events, gathering, parties, dates. Oh, that's a good one. Reunions. Wonderful. And I'm kind of curious, anything that actually might have been part of a reconnecting, friends, barbecues. Fantastic. I'm kind of curious. I mean, there's not, you know, a tremendous amount of us on here today. You know, if somebody wants to volunteer, what is the #1 event that you really missed attending in person that you haven't since quarantine started? Food, drink, picnics. Anyone want to share?
I noticed that I really miss social gatherings with friends. I can Zoom with them all I want, but it's different if you're in person. I'm sure, but Lizette, did you have ideas?
No, I just hadn't muted again.
Yeah. Poker. Oh my gosh, so true. This is funny. Actually, I have a friend who is a competitive poker player, and he's been trying to do it online, and he's like, no, this doesn't work. What I notice is that these are all about fun and community and food and drink. We just had a team happy hour on Tuesday where we each brought a drink. Not quite the same, but good to see everyone's face. Fantastic. Okay, so thank you for that. I'd like to go and find out, let's see here. The next one is, what concerns you most in regards to hosting events in a post-COVID world? So the next question is, what concerns you most in regards to hosting events in a post-COVID world? If you could please vote. I hate confrontations. It's hard to believe, but the mask shaming at one of our socially distanced events that was an outdoor barbecue was really uncomfortable. I will just tell you that. And even though, you know, as a part of my job as an event planner is to evict people from community events downtown who are breaking rules, or, you know, hold vendors accountable at events, still that was very uncomfortable. And part of it is just like having the facts, because those seem to be changing monthly about what is the best policy and what the data supports. So it's been really challenging. Thank you so much. So all of you, I think, can see the results, but in case you're calling in, number one currently is the biggest concern is hosting an event and attendees getting infected. Makes sense. The second is enforcing mask wearing and how to handle mask shaming confrontations. And the third is figuring out the logistics for risk mitigation. And the fourth is the viability of events if social distancing is required. And the last one is just, I don't think anybody actually chose that one, but that people are just concerned about attending an event. So thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. Okay, so last little one here is, I'd like to know what concerns should we discuss today? We have about 4 minutes left. I know it doesn't sound long, but, but I'd love to know what concern you'd like to spend the last couple minutes bringing up. Or if you have a burning question, or if you have an idea that you just want to share with everybody, I'd love to hear it. Or I'd love to see it, I should say.
So this is Lizette, and we're just in the place of doing this with a face-to-face event that we've hosted twice a year, each year. And I think one of the things that's really hard to figure out is how to replace what a 2-day event. How do you replace that? Do you stretch it out across a week and hope people stay engaged? Do you try to squeeze it into the time period that it was in? How long do you let sessions go before you know people are doing their email? Yeah, the whole.
I have that data for you, and actually at the end of the presentation, the last slide, and we can send the slide deck too so you have our contact information, but we offer free consultations. We have that information for you.
Cool.
Yeah, we figured it out. I would say, just off the top of my head, no more than 4 hours a day, and don't stretch it over a week. Okay, ooh, great answers here. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna read a few. So when we eventually go back to feasible live events, I imagine there'll be a large contingent who will still be looking for the live experience. What do hybrid events look like? That's really great. Let's see here. Oh, how strange. How do you balance the human need for social connection to mitigate the risk of COVID? Oh, these are fantastic. Gosh, and we've got 2 minutes left. Introverts being forced to be extroverts. Oh, that's so good too. I actually have a friend who's leading a training on that in a couple of weeks. That's great. Okay, if you guys don't mind, this is interesting. In the last minute, I might want to open it up to actually, how do you balance the human need for social contact with risk mitigation? Because I feel like there is a larger conversation happening, at least in our community, about mental health. And I'm visiting my grandmother here in Seattle. She's 96, and she can only visit us 6 feet away and can't hug us. And she's starting to suffer from dementia. It's really challenging. And so it hits home there. I'd love to know, does somebody want to share their thoughts on that one specifically? Maybe whoever asked the question.
That was my question, and it's just an ongoing question I've had and discussions I've had with friends, and I think the answer is really personal and up to each person. But it's hard to navigate for sure, and especially when you look at this pandemic probably drawing out for another year or more. I mean, who knows? So that's what makes it even tougher, because there's no end date in sight that we can point to, and so it's hard to know how much you should, you want to be safe and not spread the virus, but you also kind of need to continue living your life. So really hard.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's so true. Anybody else want to chime in before we close today?
Carrie, this is fascinating. I'm going to break a rule and say, let's extend if people want to have this conversation. Okay. So I won't cut us off today.
Thank you. Oops, wrong way. Boop, boop.
This is a pretty small group, but I feel like I know most people here, and that's an interesting conversation. I have had my own struggles during this time, and it's actually, I think it's compounded some previous struggles and just brought everything up to the surface. And I'm very lucky that I have such supportive, dare I say, aggressive friends who reach out to me and continually ask how I'm doing, because I can like kind of crawl. So this has actually not been that difficult for me, but I'm worried about the cold weather coming in, and because just going for walks, going for bike rides, having people over in the yard, that was maybe quite literally a lifesaver, for me and for other people. So I think until the snow comes, it's going to be really tough. So I don't know. Building community is just more important now than ever.
I agree. And I mean, exactly. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think most people I know have a sad light, and we're about to enter into one of the loneliest seasons of our Alaskan existence. And I think that's really important. I did want to piggyback on what Erin said. It's incredible how much friendships have deepened, and even family relationships have deepened, because we're just trying to pull each other out of sometimes the dark places. And one of the things that somebody mentioned too was like having to be introverts having to be an extrovert in order to connect online. I will say that what's interesting is I have a friend, and she and I work on introvert type focused activities. And we just came up with an idea that is actually used in elder care systems that we've heard about anyway. And that is that people will just host socially distanced reading parties where you're actually 10 feet away, not even 6, 10 feet away. So you can stretch out, and it's measured mouth to mouth, by the way, which is interesting. And you're just there listening to music and reading a book, and you're in each other's company, but you don't have to talk, and you're far enough away to be considered safe. So it's safe. But anyway, that's just like one of the types of social events that we've been seeing and that we want to promote publicly, which we're pretty excited about. I did also want to share one thing. I'd love to hear other things, but one little thing. I hosted a birthday party 2 weekends ago, and my sister-in-law's aunt came with the full shield, and she's a nurse who practices here in downtown Seattle. And again, the data and the research is continually evolving. So I can't say that this will be true a month from now, but from what she said, her current research showed that if you wear the mask, the plastic shield that goes down to here, and she had like a high collar on, which was kind of interesting, that almost created like a barrier, that you should be able to sit and talk and even hug people, as long as you're not skin to skin, just like touch their shirt. If you know that you're not infected and they've been tested and they're not infected, without spread. It is interesting because she visited a birthday party and she has not been in our social bubble, the rest of the family. And so she wanted to keep herself safe. But that was interesting to think about, that for examples like my grandmother who can't even hug, maybe wearing a shield, bundling up, at least you could pat her back or do something so you have human connection. Anyway, just some interesting things I've seen. Who else would like to share on this one? How do you balance human social contact with risk mitigation?
I was going to say, I feel like I've learned a lot about technology, and I think just the reality is that we need to figure out how to use technology to create social connectedness. And it is possible and it happens, but it does take some intentional planning and learning, like you were saying, Carrie, no more than 4 hours a day, no more than a week at a time. I think finding that, right amount of time and the right kind of activity. And, but there's been some really cool social stuff that I think has happened through technology.
I love that. And, I just wanted to share this idea. So Kai Holland, some of you may know him, he's very active in the startup community. He gave us this term, conquering distance, in early March, and we've just embraced it as part of our mission. But one of the things that evolved from our own team's discussions is that we imagine that there is a new way of interacting online that hasn't been invented yet or popularized yet. And my example is that, 10 years ago, there didn't used to be a type of presentation that was the TED Talk. And now anytime we have a conference, we have these TED-like talks. We can't use it because it's branded name, but a TED-style talk. And that is a way of presenting that didn't exist to interact, and the format didn't interact. And so we actually have been seeking startup accelerators where we could go and test these ideas and maybe develop some kind of technology online that would allow closeness. Of course, I will say one of our friends who develops apps out of Seattle for a living said, you know, the first people who are going to develop this are dating apps. 100%. He goes, I think that technology probably exists. It just hasn't been transferred over. But finding a way to have that closeness and intimacy while still keeping a professional barrier is something we're deeply interested in. So thanks, Kim. I think that's wonderful. Anybody else want to share? I see some familiar faces.
You know, one of the things that I experienced early on goes a little bit back to, I think, what Erin was mentioning, but it brings it to a bigger, more holistic, is that living in Alaska, it's like feeling claustrophobic at first. And I realized, you know, how isolated or island-like we are as well, because we can't get up and fly and go do the things that we're accustomed to doing or planning for, even making those plans. And just the planning process in our mind, you know, would typically, you know, excites me, you know, to do those things. So when I think about that, the word distance or conquering distance, I mean, that physical attribute of not being able to conquer distance is taken away as well. And there's a social or an emotional element that goes with that too. You know, ourselves, family, you know, whatever that might look like, getting to reunions, getting to family weddings, things like that. But just our geographic disposition, it just really hit me early on that, wow, it's kind of like a lockdown. We don't have that flexibility or freedom to move as we would as traditional Alaskans.
So true. I know you really, especially when they locked down the Canadian border, I realized, oh, wow, we can't even drive out of here. I started thinking, who do I know that owns a plane? In case I really need to get out of here. But I think that's really true. You know, one of the things I was curious about, thinking about, I think one of the biggest challenges of this time that I've noticed is that, as Nikki said, you know, there is no end date that we can count on. We don't really know how long we need to socially distance, you know, and for those of you who are taking care of older parents or people who are ill, I think that also poses a question. And you think, really, am I going to go 2 years without hugging my grandma? This seems ridiculous, you know? And so I think that is what I'm hoping, is that the public will take these conversations into a broader arena to start discussing, like, what is important to us, like let our values kind of guide some of the protocols as we continue to kind of navigate this virus response. But, you know, I think that is something to think about, is figuring out like how to determine different types of risk so that we, you know, can still take care of each other and ourselves, I guess. Is there anybody else that wants to answer before we close today, or wants to share their thoughts or even ideas?
No, I would invite you, Carrie, to maybe come back and present maybe in a few months, or maybe write a newsletter article. I'd love to hear more about how this develops. You seem to be right at the center of how this is going to be implemented in Alaska, and you seem to be able to maybe help those of us who are planning events or trying to assist others to do it. It would be really nice to stay connected. So thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Really, really thoughtful and full of good information. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd love to come back, and I'm curious to see what happens in January after the holidays, and just see how our community chooses to navigate it. Because what I have found is, no matter what the regulations are, when it comes to family, people are just going to do whatever they think is the most important. And so So I think what I mean by that, just reading between the lines, is I think some people will still travel. I think people will still break their social distancing groups that they've had for a while to go and celebrate. And I think it'll be curious to see if the infection rates really do increase, or if we find new ways to interact safely with relatives that we don't see, occasionally. Anyway, I'm kind of waiting for January. I'd love to come back then and report what we
We'd love
find.
to have you. So
Absolutely. Last but not least, I'm just going to share this and then pop off really quickly. So just some questions that'll be in the deck that might be interesting. If you have any ideas to share, please send them to us. We would love to work on them. So if you have anything, if you're like, hey, run with this, Carrie, I will do it. And then last but not least, our managing director, Martha Keel, said, be sure to offer $500 off. And I said, I will do that. So if you have any kind of event or need consulting, just email us at info@toastofthetownak.com, or you can contact us from the toasttovirtual.com site, and you'll get $500 off when you mention Health Tie. And last but not least, this is just our team that you will work with, and who appreciate all of you who are working in the healthcare sector and the startup sector in our state. We appreciate you.
thank you, Carrie. That is very generous offer. And I know that I saw several people who are trying to do events and who will likely reach out to you. So thank you very much for all your information. We look forward to having you back, and thank you. So, go ahead. All right, well, thank you everybody who came, and thank you everyone who stayed. That was an awesome presentation, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. So, all right, take care.
Thank you.
Everyone who shared, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.